People walk past hunger every day without seeing it. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive with sirens or speeches, but with two small hands refusing to let go. And sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the spark that changes everything. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Maple Street as Emma and Olivia walked home from school, their identical backpacks bouncing in rhythm with each step. They were 7 years old, twins down to the tiny freckle beneath their left eyes, though anyone who knew them well could tell them apart instantly. Emma walked with her chin lifted, eyes always forward, alert to the world. Olivia kept her gaze lowered, counting the cracks in the sidewalk beneath her shoes. 12, 13, 14, she murmured. You're going to trip if you keep doing that, Emma said. I never trip, Olivia replied. You tripped yesterday. That was different. 20 feet behind them, Marcus followed at an unhurried pace. Jeans, polo shirt, an earpiece barely visible. He wasn't dressed like a bodyguard from a movie, and that was intentional. For 3 years he'd been part of their lives, close enough to protect, distant enough to disappear. The girls barely noticed him anymore, which meant he was doing his job perfectly. The elementary school sat at the end of Maple Street, brick walls faded, playground equipment worn by generations of children. As they neared the gate, Emma's attention snagged on a man standing near the pickup area. Mid-40s, maybe, jacket washed thin, jeans patched at one knee. He stood straighter than he needed to, shoulders back, watching the children spill out of the building. That's Dylan's dad, Olivia whispered. Emma knew Dylan. Everyone did. The boy who shoved kids in the hallway. The boy who laughed when someone cried. She'd seen him trip a smaller kid just last week and walk away like it meant nothing. The man's face shifted when Dylan emerged from the school doors. Dylan was 9, tall for his age, with the same guarded hardness in his eyes. He walked toward his father without looking up. Hey, bud, the man said, voice warm, hopeful. How was your day? Fine. You hungry? I thought maybe we could. I said fine. Dylan brushed past him. The hope drained from the man's face, replaced by something raw and painful. He took 3 steps after his son before his legs buckled. There was no cry, no drama. He simply folded, catching himself on one hand, breath coming fast and shallow. Emma moved before she realized she'd decided to. Mister. Her backpack hit the pavement behind her. Mister, are you okay? Olivia was right there too, always just a step behind her sister. Marcus straightened, already speaking quietly into his earpiece. The man tried to push himself up, sweat shining on his forehead despite the cool October air. I'm fine, just stood up too fast. You're not fine, Emma said, kneeling beside him like she belonged there. When did you eat last? The question startled him. His eyes met hers, and something flickered there, something like shame. I'm okay, sweetheart. You don't need to. Yesterday, he whispered, after Olivia spoke softly but firmly. Yesterday morning, Dylan had stopped nearby, frozen, watching. His face held too many emotions for a 9-year-old. Embarrassment, anger, fear tangled together. Come on, Emma said, slipping an arm under the man's. There's a diner 2 blocks that way. No, I can't. Yes, you can. Olivia took his other arm. They were small, barely 70 pounds between them, but they pulled with fierce determination. The man let them help him stand. Dylan turned and ran. The pain on the man's face had nothing to do with hunger, but the girls didn't notice. They were already talking about soup and sandwiches, about Mrs. Chen's diner, about how he needed to eat right now. Marcus followed at a distance, letting it happen, making sure it stayed safe. The man's name was Richard Torres. Construction worker when work existed. The site had shut down for permits. He'd missed days. His bus pass money had gone to rent. He'd made sure Dylan ate. Always Dylan first. Mrs. Chen took one look at him and pointed to a booth. No questions. Soup and the big sandwich, Emma ordered. And pie. You need pie, too. Richard's hands shook as he ate, color slowly returning to his face. Outside, the October light softened the world. Inside that diner, 2 children learned how close kindness lived to courage. Later, at home, Robert Winters listened as his daughters told the story all at once, voices overlapping, details tumbling out. He didn't interrupt. When they finished, he leaned back, eyes shining. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he said quietly. "Are you proud?" Emma asked. "More than I can say." He told them about a winter night years ago, about a coat given away in the snow, about a lesson that had never left him. Money only matters if you use it when it matters. Days later, at the parent meeting, Richard arrived in his best wrinkled shirt. Dylan saw him and snapped, words sharp enough to draw blood. The room went silent as anger spilled out, accusations and shame laid bare. Richard absorbed it all, standing there, trying not to break. Robert crossed the room and sat beside him. "You showed up," Robert said. "That matters." And then Emma stood. Small voice, steady truth. She told them what they'd seen. What hunger looked like. What sacrifice looked like. She showed them the photo. She told them who Richard really was. One by one, parents stood, offering help, jobs, cleats, connections. The air shifted. Richard wasn't invisible anymore. When the meeting ended, Richard knelt in front of the girls, eyes wet. "You saw me," he said. "Really saw me. And you decided I mattered." That night, the world felt lighter. None of them knew how fragile that light was. Dylan came back to school the following Monday, and Emma noticed the difference immediately. He stood by his locker longer than usual, staring at the metal door as if it held answers. The boys who used to crowd around him weren't there. When Sophie Chen dropped her tray in the cafeteria and laughter rippled outward, Emma braced herself for Dylan's voice to cut through it. Instead, he stood, walked over, and knelt beside Sophie, helping gather spilled food without a word. It was small, quiet, but it mattered. Over the next days, the changes came in fragments. Doors held open, mean comments swallowed before they escaped. Silence where cruelty used to live. He ate alone more often, and when Emma asked if he was okay, he looked at her with eyes that seemed older now. "I'm trying," he said. "Trying to be better." At home, the girls told their father everything. "People can change," Robert said. "Especially when they see the cost of staying the same." 3 weeks later, Richard Torres rang their doorbell. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching an envelope. He had full-time work now. Benefits. A steady paycheck. Dylan had soccer cleats for 3 seasons. "I wanted you to know it mattered," Richard said. "What you did. All of it." He handed the envelope back. $25. Interest included. The girls accepted it with solemn nods and tucked it into their pink wallet. They thought the story was finished. They were wrong. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Richard had collapsed at work. County General. He was asking for the girls. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Richard lay pale beneath thin blankets, Dylan sitting rigid beside him. "They found a mass," Richard said softly. "Pancreas." Dylan already knew what that meant. The tests took days. The truth arrived anyway. That night, Dylan called Emma from his dark apartment. "They said I need to come now. I don't have a ride. I'm scared." Robert didn't hesitate. 90 seconds later they were in the car. The ICU was quiet, machines humming steadily. "Doctor." Chen spoke carefully, gently. "Aggressive. Spread. Hours or days." Dylan stood at his father's side, words pouring out in apology and grief. Richard stopped him. "Promise me you'll be kind," he whispered. "Promise me you'll help when you can. Promise me you'll show up." Dylan promised through tears. Richard's gaze found Emma and Olivia. "Take care of him," he asked. "We will," Olivia said without hesitation. At 2:17 a.m., Richard Torres died. Dylan screamed. The girls held him. Robert held them all. The funeral was small. Emma stood and spoke when no one else would. She told the truth again. About hunger. About dignity. About being seen. Dylan packed his life into 3 boxes. Robert took him home. Emergency guardianship. Lawyers. Resources. Money used when it mattered. That first night, Dylan sat in the guest room, funeral suit still on. "I don't deserve this," he said. "You don't decide what you deserve," Emma told him. "You decide what you do next." Months passed. Custody became adoption. Anger softened into grief. Grief turned into purpose. Years later, Dylan stood outside the same school, watching children spill into the afternoon sun. He saw a tired man standing alone and walked over. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Want some coffee?" Because once, someone had done the same for him. And it mattered. At the Winters home, Emma packed for medical school. Olivia studied law. Robert funded a scholarship bearing Richard Torres' name. On a quiet October night, the world wasn't fair. But it was kinder than it might have been. And that was enough. Time did not heal Dylan Torres the way people said it would. It reshaped him instead, bending sharp edges into something quieter, something heavier. Grief didn't roar anymore, it pressed. It sat on his chest during long nights and followed him into the mornings like a shadow that refused to be shaken. At the Winters house, the rhythms of life continued. School mornings, shared dinners, homework spread across the long dining table, but Dylan moved through it all like a guest afraid to take up space. Robert never rushed him. He understood silence. He understood what it meant to lose someone and still have to wake up the next day and function. Emma and Olivia watched Dylan carefully, the way children do when they sense something fragile nearby. They didn't smother him. They didn't ask too many questions. They simply made room. Some nights Dylan woke from dreams where his father was still alive, still working, still hungry, and the realization that it wasn't real hit him all over again. On those nights, Olivia would sit with him on the stairs, counting breaths until the shaking stopped. Emma would bring water, sit close but not touching, present in the way their mother had taught them presence could be enough. School was harder. Dylan returned as a different boy carrying the same name. Teachers watched him carefully. Some kids avoided him. Others didn't know what to say. Sophie Chen gave him a small nod one day in the hallway. He nodded back. That was all, but it mattered. Robert handled the legal battles quietly, efficiently. Emergency guardianship became something more solid. Social workers visited. Papers were signed. Questions were asked and answered. Dylan listened from the stairs as adults discussed his future like it was a delicate object being passed carefully between hands. He didn't interrupt. He was afraid that if he did, something would break. When the adoption became official, there was no party. No announcement. Robert simply told him one evening after dinner, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're staying, permanently." Dylan stared at him, fork frozen midair. "I know I'm not you're mine now," Robert said gently. "Not replacing anyone, not erasing your dad, just expanding the family." Dylan nodded, eyes burning. Later that night, Emma knocked on his door. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded again. She knew what that nod meant. She sat with him until the house went quiet. The years passed. Grief shifted into memory. Memory into purpose. Dylan grew taller, stronger, quieter. He learned to channel anger into work, into studying, into helping others. Robert encouraged him without pushing. Olivia argued cases in mock trials like they were matters of life and death. Emma studied anatomy with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They all carried Richard Torres with them in different ways. At 16, Dylan volunteered at a food pantry. At 18, he applied for legal aid internships. At 21, he stood outside an elementary school on Maple Street, watching children spill into the afternoon sun, and when he saw a tired man standing alone, he walked over without hesitation. Because once, someone had done the same for him. The first time Dylan introduced himself as a Winters, the words felt strange in his mouth, heavy and unfamiliar. It wasn't betrayal, and it wasn't replacement. It was simply survival, a new name wrapped around an old wound. Robert never asked him to stop being a Torres. He framed Richard's photo himself and placed it on the shelf in the study beside family pictures, not behind them, not apart. "Your dad belongs here," Robert said when Dylan noticed. Dylan swallowed hard and nodded. He belonged there too. Emma and Olivia grew into themselves in parallel ways. Emma's certainty sharpened into resolve. She wanted answers, early diagnoses, time bought back from illnesses that stole without warning. Olivia learned the language of systems and loopholes, how rules bent and broke people depending on who was standing beneath them. They argued late into the night sometimes, about justice, about fairness, about whether doing good was enough when the world kept taking. Dylan listened more than he spoke. He carried his father's last words like a compass. Help when you can, show up, be kind even when it's hard. In college, he worked nights and studied days, gravitating toward legal aid clinics where desperation had a familiar shape. People told him he had a calming presence. He didn't argue. He knew what fear sounded like when it tried to hide behind anger. Robert watched all of them with quiet pride. He funded scholarships without press releases. He paid medical bills without signatures. He never forgot where the ripples had started. On certain October evenings, when the air smelled like leaves and memory, they'd sit together at the dining table longer than necessary, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. 12 years after two little girls had refused to walk away, Dylan Torres stood again on Maple Street, older now, steadier. When he offered a stranger coffee, when he listened without judgment, when he paid the check and waived off repayment, the circle closed and reopened at the same time. At the Wintas house, Emma packed for medical school, Olivia prepared for law finals, and Robert signed the final approval for the Richard Torres Memorial Scholarship. Money only mattered when it mattered. And it always mattered when it was used to keep someone from falling unseen. The world was still unfair. People still suffered, but kindness had teeth. It held on. It multiplied. It refused to die. The October sun fell the same way it always had, stretching long shadows across Maple Street, turning ordinary sidewalks into places where memories liked to linger. Dylan Torres stood near the edge of the school pickup area, hands in his jacket pockets, watching children stream out of the building. Laughter echoed. Backpacks bounced. Parents waved. Life moved forward the way it always did, careless and relentless. He was 21 now, tall, composed, with a calm that hadn't come easily. Law textbooks waited in his backpack, highlighted and worn. He worked part-time at a legal aid clinic, helping people who looked a lot like his father once had, tired, overwhelmed, afraid of systems they didn't understand. As he watched the crowd, he noticed a man standing slightly apart. Mid-40s, maybe, jacket faded, shoulders slumped in that particular way that came from carrying too much alone. Dylan felt it instantly, the familiar pull. He walked over without thinking. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The man looked up, startled. "Yeah, just waiting for my daughter. You look like you could use some coffee. There's a diner 2 blocks that way. Best coffee in town." The man hesitated. "I can't really afford." "No pressure," Dylan smiled. "Just an offer." Something in the man's expression softened. "All right," he said. They walked together toward Chen's, where Mrs. Chen, older now, hair streaked with gray, would see them coming and already know what was needed. At the Wintas house across town, Emma folded clothes into boxes, preparing for medical school. She'd decided years ago that she wanted to be the one who caught things early, who bought people time. Olivia sat at the dining table surrounded by legal texts, highlighter in hand, determined to learn how to fight systems that crushed people quietly. Robert Winters sat in his study, glasses perched low, reviewing a proposal for a scholarship bearing Richard Torres' name. He signed it without hesitation. Money only mattered if you used it when it mattered. He'd learned that lesson twice over. Dylan came for dinner that night, as he did every Saturday. He helped clear the table, teased Emma about her obsessive note cards, debated Olivia on a hypothetical case until Robert laughed and told them to give it a rest. Afterward, Dylan stood at the sink with Emma, washing dishes in comfortable silence. "You thinking about him?" Dylan asked quietly. "Your dad?" "Yeah, me too. Do you think he'd be proud?" Emma didn't hesitate. "I think he was always proud of you. Even when you didn't see it." Later, Emma and Olivia sat on the floor of Emma's room, boxes half packed. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" Olivia asked. "All of it. He still died. Dylan still lost his dad." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "He didn't lose everything," she said finally. "He lost his father, and that's terrible. But he didn't lose his future. He didn't lose kindness. He didn't lose us. We can't save everyone. We can't stop death or cancer or unfairness. But we can make sure people aren't alone. Maybe that's enough. Downstairs, Robert looked at an old photo on his desk, his wife smiling, the girls young beside her. She'd taught him that wealth was a tool, not a trophy. That raising children who noticed mattered more than anything he could ever earn. Outside, the October night deepened. Somewhere in the city, Dylan Torres was buying a stranger a meal. Somewhere else, Emma studied to save lives. Olivia prepared to fight for justice. And somewhere, Richard Torres was finally at rest, knowing his son was safe, knowing that two little girls had kept their promise. The world had never been fair. People still suffered. People still fell. But there were also those who noticed. Who helped. Who refused to walk away just because it was easier. Two 7-year-old girls had seen a man collapse and decided he mattered. That decision had changed a life. Then another. Then another. Not the whole world. Just enough of it. And sometimes, enough is everything.